Now that we've gone through the process and the methodology around phishing and social engineering, let's look at some of the attack methods of ways of us walking through and conducting these attacks in the real world. Now, what are some motivating factors? Well, the very first one here that we have is urgency. That's one of the most important factors anytime we're talking about social engineering, and that's when we perform that social engineering via phone, via email. We want to invoke urgency into the matter so it creates and it allows people to react without thinking, right? So urgency is really, really important. Then we have authority. And authority is all about the email coming from someone of authority. Maybe it's the chief executive, maybe it's someone within the business that has a higher authority than the wider business, right? So it invokes a trust in who may be sending that email, if it's coming from an authoritative state or authoritative person, and then it's basically getting you to do something. And this is a typical one where we use a lot of the authority figures, and I've got some examples here that we're going to run through together, and we'll example some scenarios where you'll use this, where you've got maybe a CFO that's saying, "Hey, make a payment." You've got the CFO saying, "Hey, we've got a new meeting, all hands meeting," and I've got a Zoom template in just a moment. I'm going to show you that. You know, it creates this authority, and then people go away. They'll register the Zoom account, they'll sign up, and then they'll put in the credentials, right? Without thinking, because this is coming from authoritative people within the environment. So having that authority is another motivating factor. As we move on, we've got scarcity. And scarcity is all about creating a scarcity environment, right? Similar to urgency, a limited time, there's a limited amount. You need to respond now, or something is going to occur. You're going to lose something, which kind of jumps into our loss. And loss is all about the potential of losing out on something. Could be financial, could be clients, could be money. Um, Effectively representing that someone is going to be angry with that process and kind of falls into that authoritative state or the authoritative um, component, because if you're going to lose something, someone's going to get angry or upset. You could lose your job, and you have to go away and do this. So yeah, the core four elements around motivation. Now, as we continue on, there's another five elements around the engineering of attacks. We've got things like shoulder surfing, and this is when we're looking over someone's shoulder to either take credentials, see how they're doing something, if it's proprietary technology. And this is a very common example with people on the bus or on the train, doing their work, very consumable places where you could shoulder surf and, quite frankly, get someone's passwords or something. And then you've got things like, again, piggybacking. If we're going to piggyback, basically using a form of ID to enter a system or, a building of such, and then following someone into that secure facility without using pretty much scanners or badges, right? We're going to use them as a decoy, and then we're going to follow through with them as well. So it's basically getting access to a secure facility. Then we've got baiting, and baiting is all about dropping USBs, right? So these work wonders around many environments, putting these things in. And I'll tell you what they work very well in is you get a company letterhead on an envelope here, and it's got the company logo just there. You take a USB and you put that thing in there, and you put, attention Jimbo, or whoever that person is, when you go into the cubicles and it's got people's names on there. It's got Jim Bones, and he's the talent manager. Okay, and then you go away. You go to their, you go to the business's little, business area where they've got, the photocopiers, they've got printers, and they've got little stations of, their, papers and documents and all that sort of stuff. And you find yourself a letterhead or a logo envelope, put a USB in that, and then drop it off at Jimbo's desk. And then, sure enough, I will guarantee you that he will plug that thing in. So that's baiting. It's all about USBs and you using USBs during engagements. Um, Moving on, our next part here, the change colors, is hoaxing. So hoaxing is all about tricking people to click on things they shouldn't be, right? So this is when we're sending out phishing emails, and this is an example where people are kind of putting information without validating that. And this is, I've seen this quite a amount of times. We've done an engagement around parking, where part of the engagement, as we sort of define this with a customer, and I said, hey, why don't we do a parking example? And in the parking thing, I'll request people send me the driver's license, was one thing. They're going to send me their vehicle registration details, and they're also going to send me the mobile number because we need these things to validate if anyone wants free parking in the facility. And sure enough, 60 or so creds have come through with these people's details, right? Which is very alarming. So hoaxing is all about getting information through the email that people shouldn't be sending out, right? It could be personal stuff, it could be things with HR, maybe people, sending an email out, getting people to log into Google Drive if the company uses Google Drive, or and you were seeing them in a moment where I've got DocuSign. I've got a DocuSign example where I've created a scenario to allow people to sign in through DocuSign. And sure enough, again, probably another 90 people in that engagement were sending through credentials. So, very high success rate with these things. So hoaxing is all about getting people, tricking people to click on things or to enter details in where they shouldn't have. And then finally is URL hijacking. And URL hijacking is basically getting a duplicate domain. So typically what would happen is you've got an abc.com.au domain, then we will go register something like a-bc.com.au. And this is very common, right? Um, there's permutations that we can go away and do that we can maybe replicate these domains. And something similar maybe if the company is using an Earl and an I, you can swap these things out and they kind of look the same. So you can go away and then change the I to an Earl and vice versa, and it kind of looks really the same, right? And that's all about hijacking that URL and making it look as authentic as possible as the original URL the company uses. And you can get away with, impersonating that organization through URL hijacking. So that's part of the example. So what are the types of phishing that are available to us? So when we're going onto an engagement, well, some common attacks, what are the different types that are available to us? Well, then we've got things like phishing, right? And I'll explain this in just a moment. And then we have things like SMS, right? So we've got phishing and smishing. So using this over the phone. So if we're making phone calls and stuff like that, social engineering. And then you've got smishing if you're sending things throughout SMS text messages, as we all have seen. I've got a couple of examples that we're going to look at a few now as well. And then we've got things like farming. So farming is a technique that basically allows us to send links out to malicious websites. So either we own those websites and then we can control, how people authenticate. Maybe we're going to capture harvest credentials, so username, passwords, tokens, etc. That's all about farming. So think of that as just traditional phishing, essentially. And then we've got things like spear phishing, which we're targeting very specific people. So maybe in a farming attack, we're going to maybe send out 500 emails. Maybe in a spear phishing, it could be, maybe 3 people. And we're going to very specifically spear phish these 3 people or one person, right? It could be, and that's just the difference, right? So that's a more of a mass, you know, we're casting a net out opposed to a very specific, it could be 3 people, maybe it could be 10 people. And it's very specific to those 10 people, right? We're not going to guess. We're farming you kind of, opening up the net and you're going, well, if we get out of 500 people and we get like 3 creds, then that's great. Or we're going to get 500 people and maybe we're going to get 50 creds, right? You're kind of appealing to everyone within a mass distribution essentially, which spear phishing is not that case. You're going to be very pedantic and very specific to who you're going to target and how you're going to target them. And then we've got things like whaling. Whaling is typically going after people of high status. And this is either, politicians, people in the government, anyone that's got a high status, right? Typically, your CEOs, maybe the C-suite, CFO, people of that nature who have that authority to stay within an organization. Again, could be other people as well, like politicians, and it's typically people of high value or high status. So that's all about whaling. And then finally, we've got business email compromise. BEC is one of the biggest forms of compromise that we can do. And this is basically us compromising a C suite executive's email at the point that we then have the email and then we can send, you guessed it, we can send out emails as themselves, right? And that's one of the powerful points of business email compromise. And a lot of businesses have lost tremendous amounts of money just due to business email compromise. So that's something when we take over someone of status or someone within the business, maybe HR, could be finance, especially maybe payroll. right? And we've taken over those accounts through one of these forms, and then we have access to their account. We can email to directly to people within the business, and then it's a legitimate source, right? It's coming directly from that person, and then it's obviously very serious. So we could be sending anyone an email, and it's the legitimate source coming from that very specific person. So they're the common forms of the different types of phishing or different types of phishing attacks. Now we'll take a look at some examples as well as we sort of jump through. So something that came through this morning for me, this is a SMS that I got saying, hey, our link records show that you have outdated e-toll trips, make these payments in 2022. Well, I know that I don't have any outstanding payments and my wife makes all these payments. So that is all good, right? And that's a form, right? Something, if I click on this, it's going to do something and that link doesn't look right to me, obviously, right? So that is probably a form, in this case, a form of SMS of phishing, right? We're getting that text message that's getting sent through to us. The next one here is another email. So this is an email saying that someone within the business CEO and they want to connect with me. Well, the first thing that I can see is that this email was very badly templated. Obviously, it's coming from another domain, not from the actual providing domain here. And obviously, I don't know this person firstly, don't want to connect with them. And should I connect with them? Who knows where this link's going to take me? It's going to probably take me to LinkedIn. We're assuming it's LinkedIn. It's maybe a duplicate clone page, and then it's going to credential harvest my details, which we don't want that to happen, do we? And that's a form of either farming. I assume this is some sort of farm attack. It's not going to be a very specific spearfish because this is casting on net wide open, right? So that's a form again of either a farming technique that's been used, right? And again, sending to me, and then the domain was actually incorrect. It was a very different domain. So that's another example there. Moving on, so here's another email saying something about IT services, saying, hey, can we schedule a 30-minute call? And then if you click this link, we'll send you $200 PayPal. This is potentially another farming attack that's coming out to me directly, or could be a whaling attack. I don't know if I'm of that high status enough, but again, very recent date there that happened very early on in the morning. Again, kind of look at the domain names, doesn't look very suspicious, looks very suspicious. And then it's got details in here that I've redacted in terms of, schedule a call and we'll make payments together and this and that. So something to be mindful of is always just be cautious when you're clicking and looking at links. Now, these are examples here that I've got two examples that I've used on phishing engagements. Now, this is a template that I took out with Zoom specifically, and this was um, a customer that wanted we sort of ran through a couple of scenarios and we thought, look, Zoom was going to be the best bet because the company was using Zoom was through COVID times and everything was done through the online channel platforms. So we went away, and what I had to do as well, as you can see, there's these yellow marks here. These were incorrect spelling mistakes that I had to make, one to make it less appealing for users. That way, if we had almost over 100 people submit their credentials, even though there were mistakes here, um, meaning this was a very challenging component once we had to debrief all those users, right? So we had to go away, and the customer said, look, can you put in some spelling mistakes here just so it makes it less appealing if people do maybe see this, they can probably spot the mistake and not click on it. And this was, I think, sent out to maybe 150 people within the business. This was a very specific business unit that we targeted. And this was probably, I think the organization had just over 900 people. And then out of those 150, I think we had 105 or so credentials captured. So it was a good success rate for that. So again, even though with spelling mistakes, and we went away and actually bought very specific domain that looked like that, and it had the Zoom dash the domain, so it looked very legitimate. And then if you knew this was a compromise, we had some details here coming from the CEO to make it look appealing, and it said something like, "Hey, we're hosting this meeting." And this meeting was, I don't want to mention the subject of this meeting, but something to do with an upcoming event that was going on. When we did our due diligence to know what was occurring in that time month, and then that's how we've captured that high success rate of those users. And the other 45 or so users that weren't involved in that did a great job because then they reported the process, they followed the right procedures with the customer, and that's what we wanted. So again, following the right processes, the methodology, and the actionable steps that the organization sets. So that's an example of using Zoom that we use in this example as a template. Let me just clean that up a little bit. Okay. All right, and moving on. So let me just close that one out. And then finally, here is a DocuSign that was similar, where we did the exact same thing. I think this one was more of a whaling attack. So we had, I think there's over 500 people that we targeted. And from memory, I think it was about 140 that we had access to credentials. So again, there was a big difference, right? So almost 400 and in change, or maybe 300 plus users that didn't enter the credentials, and the 140 that did enter them, was just due to we did the exact same thing. So we bought a lookalike domain of the company, and then we had the DocuSign, something like DocuSign authorization, and then I had the domain. And obviously, we own the domain. We went through the right procedures, and it said, "Hey, this person was sharing this document with you. Click on this file to review the document." And this was obviously due to the COVID times that we ran this through as well. And this is saying that, hey, we updated our information security policies. Make sure you do this. And it came from a very authoritative figure within the organization, had their signature down here, which I've redacted just for reasons here, and that made that look a lot more legitimate than it should be, right? And should you look closer to that, obviously the domain name was wrong. Some things there that pointed all areas, not good. So, 140 people still entered those credentials in and still, you know, didn't follow the right procedures. But and then we had the other 400 or so, 360 change people that actually did follow the right thing. Um, and that's pretty much an example of some common phishing attacks. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If there's anything else you'd like to see around the social engineering front, I'd love to hear more about it. And as always, see you all in the next video. Bye for now.